nonprofit organization in the state of Georgia. But our mission is nationwide on Indian cultural heritage. We have two missions. One, we build hiking trails and recreational facilities. I have a trail crew that works every Tuesday and Thursday morning. Average age is 75. We work 4 hours a day, building trails and doing stuff and keeping them going. The second mission is Indian cultural heritage, which we started in 2007. And we've written a lot of stuff about that in our books and things. Some of you have gotten books and been here before. I've been talking up here since 2014, so we've had a lot to do. Now, this morning's story is about the Saga of the Cherokee in northeast Georgia. And I spent hours and hours building a PowerPoint presentation. I practiced it on my laptop on Monday and got everything squared away. Came in here this morning and the presentation is gone. So we're going to redo it. I can do it completely from memory. But we're going to show you some stuff first of how we do things. Now, when you do Indian cultural heritage, a lot of the way it's done in Western science. That's archaeologists, anthropologists, historians, or whatever. And if there are any of you in the audience, you know what that's all about. Now, the problem is that if you want to do it the Western science way, you have to find written material. You have to find artifacts that can validate what you're doing. When we started working on our world back in 2007, we started working with the elders of the tribe. And we worked with a number of tribal elders throughout the years, and our current mentor is Dr. James Jefferson, who's a Southern Ute elder in Colorado. In 2016, Dr. Jefferson, we go out there every year and brief him on what we found and what we're doing. And he said to us, he said, if you're going to ever learn to interpret the Native American history, you have to learn native science. What's native science? Well, it turns out there's a book written by Dr. Gregory Cajeda, who is a Pueblo. He taught at the University of New Mexico. And he wrote the book, and Dr. Leroy Little Bear, a Blackfoot, used to teach at Harvard, is the second gentleman working on that. And they taught native science. Native science is different than Western science. Native science is about connectivity, about energy. Every one of us has energy in your body, and you project that energy out. When we do something at a site, there's energy stored there. And if we can learn to interpret that energy, we can learn what was there. Now, I want you to listen to a piece of video from Tom Bell. He's a United Kituwa Cherokee Indian. He taught at Western Carolina University for a number of years. He's now retired from that. We filmed him in 2010. And the day we filmed him, he said his elders had told him that he could begin to tell things that we were never able to tell before. So listen to what he has to say.
In the way in which we speak, there is a concept of when you are born, it's as if life is, in fact, all in one place. And it's not a lateral movement. It's not a chronological lateral movement. Tantamount to a room. And when you are born, you come in one door. And you are going to exit another door when your journey is over. But in your journey through that room, everything everything that ever existed, and all the people that ever existed, and maybe even all the people that will exist, are all in that room. And the purpose of your journey through that room is to ascertain as much wisdom from all of those events as you can before you have to exit. This is your one shot, so to say. We don't know what's on the other side of that room. We don't know what's on the other side of that door. But in that time period here, everything that ever happened is all in that room. It's not a random thing. So that the things that happened 1,000 years ago, the things that happened 117 years ago, when people were moved on this area, to us were only yesterday. Our grandmothers and our grandfathers lie in this field, and they plow over the very graves of their grandmothers and grandfathers. But when I'm here at this place, I'm not alone. It is a true fact that even though we can't see it, even though we can't perceive it by the empirical senses, I know that whatever happened 1,000 years ago, the people that lived in that time are still here. And that I am still a part of that too. Because if it happened to them, and I'm connected to them, and they're here, and I'm here, then it happened to all of us. There's no break in the line. And it's still going on.
That's some powerful knowledge right there. When we first filmed that, we didn't realize what we had seen, I don't think, until we started really learning about native science. But what Tom is talking about is that everything that ever happened is still here. If I come into this room today and put my hand on the rug and come back tomorrow, I can find the spot that I put my hand on because there's energy been stored there. There's energy that's projected out everywhere you go. And the issue is, if I can read that energy, and if I can interpret it, and I can start to dig out information. And pretty much what we've been learning from the elders is that there's a lot of history that's still there. And if you can go into that site and you have the skills to do this, then you can interpret what's happening. Now, how do you interpret that? We use dowsing. These are dowsing rods. I can't control them. They're in sleeves. But I can ask yes and no questions. I'm from Jasper, Georgia. If I ask a question and get a yes answer, the rods will go like that. If I get a no answer, they'll go like that. Am I in Jasper? Am I in Pigeon Forge? Am I at the Ramsey Hotel? Am I in Saloon C? Is my cohort Bob Wells here? Where is he? He's the man back there with the camera. Now, in this room, there is no water here. If there's water, the rods will cross in front of me and stay closed. But there is energy. And when I find energy, the energy is going to flip the rods out and line up with that energy. And if I walk down here, there's the first energy line. Right there. And if I keep going down here, there's another energy line. Right there. And if I keep going down here, there's another energy line. If I keep going down here, there's another energy line. Is there any energy that way? Right here on this road? Is there energy here? There's energy on this road. So we can go into sites with these rods and we can start asking yes and no questions. And we can interpret what's there. if the energy, if it's there and there's energy there that we can interpret, then we can start telling the story. So I want to tell you about a story that we did starting in January of 2024 in Gainesville, Georgia, at the Linwood Nature Preserve in Gainesville, Georgia. And Tom and his wife Margaret in the back here are the ones that run that place. They called me and said, "Can you come look at some stuff here?" And we found, years ago, I used to tell you about the marker trees, you know, the Indians bent the trees and did like that. Well, there was a marker tree there marking the site. It's a burial tree, and there was 10 graves there. 10 Cherokee graves. And the question would be, is why do we have Cherokee graves here? And they're dated, we can date them, and they dated them to 1835. They're not supposed to be there. That site had long been treated out or seeded out, and there was not supposed to be any Cherokees there. Not anywhere in that time frame anyway, and they were close to the 1838 when they were being removed. As we looked around that site further, we found another 9 graves in another site, 2 more Cherokee graves in another site, a total of 19 graves. And nearby, where those graves were, we found 26 descendants buried there. Now, you know, if you have a family graveyard, you know, a lot of people want to be buried with grandma and grandpa and whatever and be buried in there and that same thing. The Cherokee had the same desire. They wanted to be buried with their ancestors. And for whatever reason, they started getting buried there about 1890 until about 1925. And then it stopped. And it stopped probably because it became a dairy farm. But this whole site was full of Cherokee graves and Cherokee descendants. Why? Where did they come from? Why are they buried there? So we started investigating and started going backwards. Where did they come from? What happened to them? And this then became the story of the Cherokee Indians of the Lower Towns in South Carolina and Georgia. In 1776, the Georgia militia, the South Carolina militia, and the North Carolina militia joined together and they attacked the 50 Cherokee towns in South Carolina, North Carolina, Tennessee, and Georgia. And they burned all those towns. They burned their food supplies. They killed 2,000 of the 8,000 Cherokees that lived there. Now, why did they do this? Because the Cherokee trading partner was the British. And in the Revolutionary War, they stayed with the British, unfortunately, and the civil militia attacked them and killed them. And so you had 2,000 killed, and many of the rest of them spread and fled because they were being attacked and being charged off. In the lower towns, there's 15 lower towns. Out of the 50, probably around 2,000 people live there. We think 500 died. 1,000 probably went to the west, and somewhere around 400 to 500 went south into Georgia. Now, between South Carolina and Georgia is the Tugaloo River, and as you go further south, it becomes the Savannah River. So they crossed over the Tugaloo, and before that, you know, it's pretty wide now because of being dammed up, but back then it was a lot smaller. They crossed over the Tugaloo and they hid in northeast Georgia in 1776 with the clothes on their back. This is July 1776. They only have the clothes on their back. They don't have any food, no seeds to plant. They've already planted their food for the year. They have no food, no medicine, and they're starving. And probably, we think in the first winter, half of those probably died. Now, this is kind of like the Israelites in the 40 years of roaming the desert. Except in the case of the Cherokees, it's 63 years. For the first, all the way up until about 1813, they remained up in that area. We found 6 of the 15 towns, people, up in that area. And they were just surviving. Now, an interesting thing happened is that in that area we got seeded out in about 1790, and then again in 1809 or something of that order. Everywhere they were living, the land kept getting seeded away, given out by Cherokees that were still surviving up in the Carolinas. And so these people were starving, they were trying to survive, and out of that came the compassion of churches in Georgia. And the first church that helped them was the Eastonolly Baptist Church in Eastonolly, Georgia, which is very near Toccoa. And there was a bunch of Cherokees there, and they were being ministered to, if you will, and helped with some food, some medicine, some assimilation help. But then what we started finding in researching these things is that some of the members married into the church. In the case of Eastonolly, 10 Cherokees married people from that church. But then when they died, it came time to get burial rites. And they're not buried in the cemetery of the church. They're buried, we found 10 of them, they're buried on a piece of property which is now the Georgia Technology College off of Route 17. And they were denied permission to be buried there. There are, at that same site, I think about 15 or 16 descendants buried, right near where the 10 Cherokees are buried, still on that property. Unfortunately, because of the way they were living, they were subjected to a lot of the diseases that were occurring: typhoid, smallpox, numbers of other that thing, and so they were losing it. And every time they had an attack of a disease on the tribe, that was bad medicine, and they would leave and go somewhere else to try to do it. So we tracked all these Cherokee through northeast Georgia. The second site we found was in Academy Baptist Church in Jackson County, which is Jefferson, Georgia. Academy Baptist Church was there in the early 1800s, found by a man by the name of Cunningham, and he helped start that church. And the Cherokees happened to be living about 2 miles from the church, which is now a quarry. And some, again, they married into that church. It's a small little Baptist church in a little valley. The land goes up on the hills. And so there they were with Jared Cunningham helping them and doing this. And I think there was 10 to 12 Cherokees that married into the church. The church cemetery is here, and up the hill, at the top of the hill, is where the Cherokees are buried. And then up that hill are little rocks standing up, going up that hill. That's the descendants. They're buried all over that area, but not in the cemetery. So they were denied from doing that. And they left, they had an attack of cholera on a little creek that they were staying on, and then they left. And interestingly enough, Jared Cunningham left and went with them to help protect them wherever they moved to. Down the road from Academy Baptist Church in Jackson County is is what is it? Bent Creek Church or something. No, sorry, I can't remember the exact name. Another church, another group of Cherokees living nearby. That church helped out. Church people, got into that church and married into it, started doing it. When it came time to burial, again, denied. We found those Cherokee buried, unfortunately, in a new housing development over in Jackson County. It's on the creek. They're on one side of the creek, the houses are over here. I don't know if the houses got built onto the graves or not. But they're all the Cherokees are buried over there. We did not find the descendants over there that were buried. They were buried near the church, not in the cemetery, but outside of the cemetery in a wooded area are all the descendants. Don't know whether the church denied them that right, or whether they just decided they did not want to be a part of the normal burial process. And so they're buried off into the field over there. They had an attack of power also. They left there and they went to Linwood Nature Reserve, which was their last site. And they went there in 1832. By 1835, they had an attack of typhoid, and they lost over half to 2/3 of their members. And those people are buried on the Linwood Preserve. They were associated with Hope Methodist Church, New Hope Methodist Church in Gainesville, and which did not help them at all. I mean, we went to the cemetery and didn't find anything in the cemetery associated with it. We did find the family names who were there, but they just didn't do it. And so they went there and we found all these people. Now, interestingly enough, in that place is that we use our dowsing to find all the graves. The graves are above the ground. There's the body place there. They put a clay cap over the top, put rocks on top of it, most of it quartz, to mark them. So we could see the graves completely. The city of Gainesville, the Parks and Recreation people own that property. And they said, oh, well, we see that Don Wells is out there finding these graves, but we want more proof. So Tom and Margaret, who run the Redwood Project and Mountain Stewards, we paid $2,500 a day for one day. We brought in a PhD archaeologist with ground penetrating radar. And he went in and ran his radar over each of the graves and validated that those graves are there. So we now have evidence that the dowsing is proven as a methodology for finding the graves. So we have all that there. Now at that same site, across the street from the Linwood Nature Preserve is a piece of private property owned by the Ropers. And Mr. Roper died in 2023. And so his descendants are trying to sell that property. Margaret and us and Tom and I and all, we have told the city that there are graves on that property. And those graves are there. There are 7 Cherokee graves and 24 descendant graves. They look identical to the ones that are on the Linwood property. So far, the city of Gainesville has not stopped any development. It hasn't started. It hasn't stopped either. Now, one of the things that we're finding there is that in our nation, we have the National Preservation Act, written back in the 60s. In that paragraph 106 in that thing says, you must validate that any piece of property you're going to develop doesn't have any Native American history there. So what they do is they go hire an archaeologist, and the archaeologist didn't go on the property to look, they just look in the record, what is written about it. Well, these Cherokees are hiding. They had no language yet on that, and there's nothing written. So you're not going to find anything written about it. So you can't do that, and if you don't go look, you can't find the artifacts. So that's what's happening in our world today, is all of our cities and our counties and our states and our federal people are using 106 to say, well, I just go hire somebody and they'll tell me there's nothing there, and then I can go ahead and develop it and dig it up. My partner, Bob, and I went and looked at a piece of property in Snellville, Georgia, a year ago. Found graves, found mounds that were there. They go back quite a ways. It was up for development. All known, paid, we told city planning and zoning, there's graves, you shouldn't go in there. They told us, forget what we're doing, get out of our way. First thing they did is they took the bulldozers in there and went directly to where the graves are and bulldozed them. That's the problem we're facing. Okay. Now, going back to Gainesville. In Gainesville, there's another church called the Flat Creek Baptist Church. It's in southeast Gainesville area. When we went to that side, to the side of the church, a very big church, the pastor came running out and greeted us and said, what you're here for? And we told him we were here to look about these graves. And he said, oh, wow, this is really important. I want to do something. And runs back into the church, comes back out with a brochure. The church has been in business for 200 years. They just celebrated their 200th anniversary. They published a booklet of all of their history. In the booklet is the history written about how they helped the Cherokees who were there, living right nearby. And that not only did they help them with medicine and food and assimilation, and some of them married into the church, they started a school for the church. They had a picture in the brochure of their school. And so they were there doing that, and the Cherokees that died are buried in that church cemetery. Those stones all over the road. And adjacent to them are another bunch of stones, are descendants in that church. One church out of many that recognized the fact that these were people that were suffering and they needed help, and they gave them rights to be buried in that church. So the Flat Creek Baptist Church is probably the most important one, and we have evidence, written evidence, that they were there. The group that was there was I think the Qualahatchee. In 1838, we have the Trail of Tears. The government said we're going to remove all the Indians. They did that and signed the law in 1830 by one vote. They won by one vote. And Jackson, who was president at the time, said we're going to remove them, and then following president, they took all the people who were there. At that church, there were about 13 remaining Cherokee still there. The government came in, or militia came and got them. The pastor of that church at the time said, I don't want that to happen without my help. So he stopped being the pastor of the church, and he joined the Cherokee, and he went on the Trail of Tears with them. And when they got to Oklahoma, he stayed with them in Oklahoma. So it's a really neat story that's there. The unfortunate part about it, a story like this, is that I would have expected the Cherokee Nation to know this. I would have expected that they knew that they fled in 1776. The Cherokees that were left sued for peace, and they started ceding land, but they were still there. You would think that they would want to go find their brothers and sisters and bring them back and help them, but they did not. They did not go and find them. They did not search for them. And these people were suffering over long, and they kept moving from place to place throughout northeast Georgia. And another church would help, and then they'd get a disease, and then move down. And they kept diminishing until 1838, when whatever was left was gone. So in 63 years, 64 years, they lost hundreds of Cherokee. And some of them were, a lot of them got new ones born and they were lost. It's a sad tale. It's almost as sad as the Trail of Tears story of, sending them out. 13 groups left out of Charleston, Tennessee, and went across the 800 or 900 miles, and we lost 4,000 of the Cherokees on the Trail of Tears, and many more that disappeared that we can't account for. In the book, the new book of stories of Indian cultural heritage in the Southeast, is also the story of the Trail of Tears. It's called The Cherokees, not just the Trail of Tears, not just the Cherokees, because it's about the whole 5 civilized tribes who went out. And if you read that and find out how many were killed, how many they suffered through all of this trauma, and you wonder today how any of them can have any kind of life. And not only that, after we got them on the reservation, the government went in. I'm sure that story's in there too. The government went in and decided that they represented a security risk to the national security. And so they went in and took the children out of those reservations, thousands of them, and moved them to schools that were 400, 500, 600 miles away, so that the parents couldn't come visit. And they said, we're going to teach them skills so they can be put back into the workforce and do it. And they didn't teach them anything. They took the language out of them, and they beat the customs out of them. They cut their hair, which is their spirituality. They scrubbed them with DDT. And many of them died. And they're buried, those children are buried all over the nation where those schools were. And we worked on that last year a little bit on trying to find all these children. There's thousands of them that we lost. And yet, the United States is starting, the Department of Interior about a year ago started to say, okay, we did this. But they're not really saying everything of what they did. The truth has not come out. The truth did come out in Canada, where Canada said we killed 5,000. Actually, there's 10 that they killed. 10,000 children. So if you look at that, look at the stories that are going on within the Native culture, this is a terrible story. This is part of our history, unfortunately. This is the black part of our history. And the question is how much more can we find? We had 15 towns that were attacked and killed. We found 6. Where did the other ones go? And can we go find them? And can we find their story and put that together? It's a very difficult task, because you got to go somewhere to find them, and you can't just say, well, they're in Georgia somewhere, or it's just, you got to be more specific so that you can get, if I can get close enough to the site, I can begin to read the energy. But I can't read it if I'm hundreds of miles away. It's pretty hard to do. So it's a story that's there. It's a story that is hard to listen to, but it is a story that has remained unknown for hundreds of years. We now know what happened to the people from the towns, and we're going to keep trying to go back. Unfortunately, right now, the Indian tribes are mostly run by the younger generation. The elders that I've worked with are the ones that would talk to us and carry on and do it, but they're all gone. Almost what's down now is the younger generation, and they want to take the position mostly of, if you're not one of us, you can't be learning about our history. You can't be researching it. We don't necessarily trust you for what you're doing. And so a year ago, I wrote to 5 chiefs and said, I'm here to help you. I'll do it for free. I'll come and do it whatever you want to do, but I'll help you find your children that are buried. And not one of them responded to my letters. Not one of them called me. They just ignored me. So we're not going to get very far on what we're doing, but we're going to continue. We're going to continue doing the work we do until we can. And hopefully there'll be a younger generation coming behind us that's going to be able to do this kind of work. This is important work. We need to tell the history. We need to tell the stories. That's how it is. To tell the stories of what happened and what went on, and help people understand what we did, and maybe we could fix some of this stuff. Maybe we could help find things, or we could save some graves that are being threatened by developers every day. It's going down. We lose a sacred site every day because people don't care.
When you go in and you identify these graves, you know for sure that this is a burial. Are there not can they not come in and put a fence around it with a historical marker and say, just build your subdivision around it?
There's a Georgian law that says no matter who's in that grave, you cannot destroy that grave. But they're ignoring it.
Not here in Sevier County.
Now, some counties, I'm working with Lumpkin County, Georgia right now a little bit on I've found some bunch of graves there, and they want to put a trail in, a little recreational place, and they're asking for help. And we're going to go in and identify the graves so they can route the trail around the graves, and we don't destroy the graves. That's one county out of many that unfortunately are doing that.
The University of Tennessee came in and said they started to dig behind our courthouse and moved the road towards the river. They went into an Indian village that they thought was over 1,200 years old. They stopped it. If you go to Shawnee's, it's that hump that's got a big tree on it.
Yeah, it's in my neighborhood down the road from me is Canton, Georgia, and they built a Walmart. Walmarts are famous for tearing up stuff. And they went in there, and it turned out to be the Hightower Cherokee Indian Village, and they didn't recognize that, and they went right in and started digging, and then immediately started hitting graves, and had to stop. And they stopped for 6 months while the Cherokee came and took the graves and reinterred them in another place in the county so that they could be protected. But had it not been seen, is that the case? In the case of Snellville, Georgia, when we were working with the people over there, the bulldozers went in and started doing the graves. One of the neighbors walked down and said, "What are you guys doing?" "Oh, well, we're doing it." And the bulldozer operator said, "Oh, yeah, we saw some bones." And then when they tried to interview, "Oh, no, there's nothing. We didn't see nothing." So they just destroyed what was there. And it's happening. And it's hard to fight City Hall without a bunch of lawyers to go in. We don't have, in my organization, we're small potatoes. We can't bring in lawyers and stuff and try to fight this. It's hard. And they'll bring in their high-powered lawyers to try to call you up. The lawyers went after Margaret over there when we were trying to do it. They said, they just want to push you. So
Let's
it's.
ask you one more question. Dowsing rods. I have friends that can do it. I've tried it. I can't. I don't know why I can't. But before they started embalming people, these friends of mine are very well known, so I'm not going to tell who they are, but they did not drain their blood, and they could tell was it a male or a female. Can you do that?
I can go. This is an interesting thing. I've taught about this. This is a gift. If you, I don't know how many of you all are Christians, but if you go to the Bible and go to Ephesians, I think it's Ephesians 12:6 or something like that, there are gifts that God gave to all the people. And you can look and find, and there's a way to teach that, to find what gifts you have. I know what gifts I have. I teach it. And if you have the right gifts, you can do these things. I can go to a grave, and I can tell you if it's a male or female. I can tell you when they died. I can tell you how they died. I can tell if that grave is related to the grave over here.
Male or female?
Male or female, and I can do it. Now, with the rods, when you step and go over the top of a grave, if I stand in the middle of the grave and hold my rod, it will point either to the west or to the east. If it points to the west, it's a woman. If it points to the east, it's a male. And the reason for that is all graves are buried with the head to the west and the feet to the east. So if it's a woman, it points to the head. If it's a male, it points to the feet. And it does it 100 out of 1. And I can walk into a cemetery and walk over the existing graves and not look at the thing, and it'll do exactly that. So you can determine whose that grave is. Now, my wife, Diane, I lost her 2 years ago, almost 2 years, this coming February. She was what's called a knower. In the tribe, we had medicine people and we had knowers. A knower is a person who knows the past, the present, and the future. They can perceive things that are coming. They can perceive everything that's existing. She could walk up to the grave and tell me the name of the person buried there. I walked up to a grave one day, it was a little Cherokee grave, and she says, "That's Little Bird." I said, "What do you mean, Little Bird?" She said, "That's Little Bird." I got my rods out and I checked. "Is this Little Bird's grave?" "Yes." 2 years old. Cherokee 2-year-old child died from a disease. I said, "How do you know that?" She says, "It just comes to me." And for me, I have to use their dowsing rods to find the energy. She finds it. She walks through and says, "Oh, I just felt it. It's right here." So there are people that have skills that can do things, who can tell what's coming, can tell what's happening in the future. Or they will know that something's going on. Quick story. We're in church one Sunday. Church is over. I got up and said, "Let's go have coffee in the parish hall." She says, "I can't leave." "Why?" She says, "Someone in this church needs me." Okay. When she tells me that, I know to leave. When everybody left the church, there was one woman sitting in the back of the church. She went back and sat down with her and said, "Can I help you?" The lady said, "Yes, you can." She says, "I have cancer. I'm going to be operated on Monday. I'm scared to death." And this was in North Virginia. She said, I've never been to a church. In that part of North Virginia, there was a church on every corner. Ours was a little beat-down church. She showed up there because God sent her there, and she was there to receive her. She took her to the altar, prayed for her. She was operated on. They found the cancer, cured it. She joined the church the next week. That's the kind of stuff a knower can do. And there are people in this audience, I know, somewhere in here there would be a knower who can do that. I have some of the knowing ability, but nowhere near she had. So you learn that there are skills that you can do, and you can, if you learn to use them, you can interpret what's out there. And that's the job we need. We need people to be able to do that and continue to do that so we can tell the stories that are missing.
Have you ever gouged the Boyd's Creek area here in River County?
I have my hearing aids in.
There's an area here in Sevier County called Boyd's Creek where there was a famous battle fought, John Sevier versus the United. It's around the area of the Wheatlands Plantation. Have you ever doused there?
I have not done it, but I could. And we have been to battlefields to try to find the missing soldiers.
Those are the 28 Cherokee graves there.
Well, we could do that too, yes, ma'am.
How do you tell the difference between the first original people and the second?
It's age. Question is, how do I tell between the original and the descendants? We age the grave. And I can age the grave using this. And if they're like only 100 years old or 150, 200, they're not 200, but 150 below, then we can just say, okay, this is the first or the second or the third generation or whatever. One of the interesting things too is that when all the Indians left, and we killed off 90% of them, we thought they had lost their ability to bend trees. But the knowledge was in the elders, and we killed off the elders. We're finding descendants with marker trees that are there. At the Linwood Preserve, there are 2 or 3 trees that are bent that are only about 100 to 120 years old. I said, well, we wanted to find one who could talk to us and teach us how to do this. We have not done that, not been able to find one. But there were some that still had the knowledge on how to bend trees and make them. And the bends, these are 90-degree bends in the tree, and not breaking the tree off. They bend it. So they bend it when they're very young, but nevertheless they did. They bend them. So that's how we do it, and we find the descendants that way. But it's, and when you find 24 in one side, it's like, what? Normally it's 1 or 2 or 3 here. They'll be buried near. And if we find the descendants, then we know that the ancestors are nearby also. And we can go look for the ancestors. It may not be marked by a tree, but it may be a stone or some other type thing. So this is the kind of stuff that we could do. And if we could get more people to do this, we would really be able to do a lot. Yes, sir.
Don, you used the term a few times, seeding land. What do you mean by that?
Okay, question about seeding land is that in the state of Georgia, for instance, when Oglethorpe arrived, he went and talked to a number of Creek people, and they seeded, given away, the land that they could live on along the coast. And then they bring more people in and say, we need more land, and we want you to seed, C-E-D-E-D, more land to us so that we can have more people to do it. And they kept doing that until eventually they started in 1736 or so, and by 1827, all the state of Georgia had been ceded to the new settlers, and the Indians had left. Now they all claimed, well, you're supposed to get out. What we're doing is we're finding the families that stayed, and we've been interviewing them. Some of the stories about the interviews of the families that stayed. They were raised as Indians, But they stayed, and they could not talk about it. They only talked about it in the family, but they went out and did it. I interviewed a lady in White County, Georgia. She was 7 years old before she knew there was anybody else than her siblings. And the only reason is her father said, okay, I'm going to the mill today, you can ride with me. And she rode to the mill to grind the corn and said, my God, there's people. And she learned. But when we interviewed her, she was 67 years old. She's still trying to live like she did back then. She was in a hollow and nobody else was there. She finally learned when she had to go to school, and then that's another thing. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
You talked about at the grave sites that the Indians were buried here and the descendants of there. Who are the descendants now? Is it the children?
No, it's the mothers, fathers, if they had children, and then they grew up, and they had children, then they would be buried where their ancestors were. And they just, interestingly enough, they were members of the church, and they could be buried in the church cemetery, but they chose to be buried where the grandparents were, or the great-grandparents, or great-great-grandparents. They would move over there. And that's kind of a fascinating thing, because it only happens, if you look at it, at the Linwood site, 1838, they're gone. We don't find them until 1890. So there's a couple of generations that are missing that were buried somewhere else, probably on their farm. But then they got into that New Hope Methodist Church, and they started deciding, I want to be buried where they are. So somehow they knew the story of where their people were. And they knew they must have probably been going visiting. And they decided, I want to be buried there. And they had to then take the body. It's like maybe 2 miles from New Hope back to Linwood. They had to take the body there and put them in the grave. And they're buried randomly all over this hill. And it's like, wow. And there's whole families there. Mother, father, uncle, aunt. How deep are they? They dug a hole based on what we saw on the radar. It's maybe 12 or 18 inches down, and then it's lined with rock. And the body's placed in there. They then covered it, and it looks like there's a layer maybe of quartz over that, and then clay over the top of that with quartz and clay. And you can still see them today. No markers. No markers. Other than the tree. There's a couple of marker trees, but that's it.
Historical markers, the kind that look like a shield on a black post, these kind of historical markers.
There's nothing there, except for the trees that are there. Just been.
I just wanted to ask you about when a body is cremated, how does that change what the stuff?
Well, you would think no head, no feet, no whatever. I was in Colorado. I do a lot of work in Colorado, and I was there a number of years ago, and people wanted to trick me. Come over here and tell us what's in this grave. And I went in there and I said, it's a male. And they got kind of this funny look, and he said, well, we cremated him. I said, well, still, the signature is still there, whether they cremated him or not. And I was able to read it. I don't know if I can do that for everyone, but that's happened. And I said, okay, that's what we'll do for.
And if you get scattered in the ocean or something?
Yeah, ocean, if they're in there, I don't think we're going to find them.
Hey, I was wondering about maybe like church records, even small churches have minutes of meetings. Maybe they voted whether they were going to be buried in or out.
We haven't been able to get. Only the Flat Creek Baptist Church is the only one that's talked to us. One thing I forgot to mention too is that in the graves that are on the Roper property, they're associated with Corinth Baptist Church in Gainesville, Georgia. Nobody's buried, or we could not. We started looking for them in the cemetery, and they were not there. However, there's row after row after row in the cemetery, and many of them have these granite rock structures around so that, you know, put the graves in there. And in one row, there's 20, 25 feet of blank space. And we went to that space and we found the 7 spouses of the Cherokee Indians buried there. No marker. On the very back row against the fence. And you kind of want to ask, well, is this, you know, I'll let you be buried here, but you're not going to have a marker in front of this grave. And it's like, okay, but that's what is there. And I'd love to go take the ground penetrating radar in there, but we'd have to get permission from the church to do that. And we'd have to raise another $2,500. You know, it's just a lot of money to go use the ground penetrating radar. And it's not, I mean, you really have to be an expert to be able to read that ground penetrating radar. It's a lot of fuzzy lines to me. But they seem to be able to read it, say, yep, this is it. And they can tell exactly how the grave was built. And the neat part about it, too, is that the gentleman, the archaeologist that did it for us, had been working in Europe, in Scotland, Ireland, UK, all that kind of thing. And he said, I've seen graves over there that look identical to these graves. And said, okay, well, did they learn from the people that came over? Did they teach them how to do some of this? It would be another part of the interesting story. There's a story in the book there about mortuary practices of the Indians and about how they followed certain things. This is something we need to spend some time on sometime. All right, we're running out of time here. One more question.
I guess I'm curious about the Indian mounds. Aren't there Indians buried?
Oh, the mounds? On the Mountain Stewards website, www.mountainstewards.org. If you go to the Mountain Stewards website, and it's got pull-down menus across the top. If you go to research and hit research and pull down, there's a section there called reports and another section called videos and several others. In the reports, in 2022, we did a major study on the mounds in the United States. And it's called the Mound Study. It's in there. It's a 50-page report. It's almost a book. And they call them the Indian mounds. They're not Indian mounds. They're Mesoamerican, European, and Asian. And we were able to go in and look at all the mounds. Now, what happened is after they left, the Indians moved on to the mounds and took them as their own. And so they're called Indian mounds today, but they're not. They are Mesoamerican, native English, well not English, but European and Asian. All of them. So if you want to read that report, and you can download it, it's free. You can get it and find out everything you want to know about mounds. Okay, thank you for your attention, and I'm sorry we didn't have this.